Hello, and welcome to Levels Plus Whenever episode 178, and it's going to be the last time this decade we'll be doing a looking back episode. We're finally caught up. Going to do 2020 through 24, and then can't touch this topic again until 2030. There's a lot going on, but I'm going to save video game industry talk for another video because this one's pretty lengthy as it is. So let's do a few pickups, then we'll dive into the main content today. I got some stuff from my Nintendo, including this Super Mario Bros. 40th pin. The other one's in a different locale. This came with the Super Mario Galaxy 2 pin that you see over there. The most exciting thing is the Lego Zelda set, the final battle from Ocarina of Time. Ganon was so fun to build, such an incredible design in terms of just how all his pieces came together. The set itself really reflects the final battle, although Link never got this much airtime. There's some really cool secrets with it I can't really show you at the moment, but there's a Megaton hammer in the tower, there's hearts under Zelda. Ganondorf is underneath the panel behind Zelda there. It's just a really cool set. I love it so much. It all makes sense with Ocarina of Time getting remade, why they went with that one. And it's really nice to have it next to my Breath of the Wild Deku Tree. Alright, back to normal camera. Sorry for the AC noise through all of this. It's summer. I can't help it. I also got... There we go. Metroid Prime 4 Beyond fancy posters. So there's this one, and then... this one. So shiny. Splatoon stickers. I had these before, but I used them all practically on an old water bottle I am no longer using. So since I could reorder them, I did, and I might make my water bottle look a little bit more fancy. Well. Here we are at the end of looking back episodes. The last one I can do until the end of 2029. And I think the first half of this decade has been fantastic. I counted before I recorded, and there's, I believe, 23 games on this list that are on the top 111, and it's like a quarter. So that says a lot about how I feel about games in the last 5 years. Let's go ahead and get started with 2020 with Spiritfarer, one of my favorite indie games of all time. Emotional game. Love storytelling in this game is so good. The artwork is brilliant. The soundtrack is perfect for it. I think that it's one of the best sim games I've ever played, and I don't like the genre that often, so that's saying a lot. It all just comes together so effectively to just make you feel so many feels as you lead all of your temporary residents to the afterlife and work out the thing that's keeping them in the spirit realm. I still need to do the DLC. I haven't quite been in the right place to tackle that because I believe that the DLC is even more personal to Stella, the main character, than all of the other characters that were in the game to begin with. And it's just a marvelous experience. I cannot recommend it enough. Streets of Rage 4 is probably my third favorite beat 'em up ever made, behind Ninja Warriors once again and Absolem. And it's up there for most of the same reasons. It's got fantastic evolution of the original Streets of Rage mechanics and flow, with an incredible art design and hand-drawn art. A great varied soundtrack from many notable composers, including the originals from the trilogy on the Genesis. It feels amazing to play. Cherry is so much fun. I love her whole vibe in that game. And then they added a whole awesome roguelite mode that basically set the stage for my second favorite beat 'em up of all time, Absolem. So I think the Streets of Rage 4 is just one of the best things to come out of Sega indirectly in the last 5 years. It is certainly the highest ranked Sega property on this list, not counting Atlas titles. Trials of Mana is like Square's Lost Dreamcast game, is the most complimentary thing I can say about it. It just feels like it's a game out of time. Like it came out in 2020, but it felt like it came out in 2000 to me. And again, highest compliment possible. Just the visual aesthetic reminds me of games of that era. The gameplay is solid. The remixed soundtrack is really good. I like the new art style. The characters are great, but the voice acting is probably the biggest fault it has. It has good talent, but I feel like the voice direction is a little bit iffy on a few of them. Kevin in particular is the one that gets under my skin. But really outside of that nitpick, like combat feels great. You're able to mix it up between 3 characters no matter the run. There's a class system that lets you have a little bit of variety in what you ultimately decide for them to do. It's a really solid game, and if I'm not mistaken, it is the highest ranked Square Enix game on this list. So it is my personal favorite of everything they've released thus far in the last 5 years. There's some other games that I've started but not got super deep in that I would like to see if that changes, like Final Fantasy VII Remake and the Romancing Saga 2 Remake by the same developers, and the little bit of vibe I got out of that is very similar. But yeah, I think Trials of Mana is a really great remake. It doesn't supplant the original, it does its own thing. So that's just also a nice little bonus about it, is that it's not trying to eliminate, it's just trying to innovate, I guess. Most people would probably have Hades up in their top 3. I've been pretty blatant about my general apathy for most roguelikes and roguelites. I've only recently started to find that subgenre clicking with me in like Donkey Kong Bonanza's bonus mode and Absolem. Hades works well because it ties a lot of the repetition into its narrative loop. So you get more details about the characters in the world as you repeat yourself. And Zagreus's whole arc of wanting to escape to see his mother is a really compelling narrative when it's told so well with incredible voice work and beautiful artwork. This is just a gorgeous game all the way around. It's got a fantastic soundtrack and it controls super tightly. That's probably why it's as high as it is, because I haven't finished it. I played it for probably a good 5-6 hours. I think I got up to the Colosseum or whatever that boss fight is and haven't quite got past it yet, but it's a great game. And at some point I'll probably get into Hades 2 and I will likely enjoy it even more with all the lessons that they learned from this. Last but not least on the games I'm going to cover for 2020 is Animal Crossing New Horizons. A concept that kind of hit its apex, I feel, with New Horizons, and at the same time didn't evolve the series enough for me to be more enthusiastic about it. And yet it's still here in the top 5. I don't own it at the moment, but it sure did get me through COVID, and I had a pretty good time with its greater flexibility with placing furniture and in outdoor spaces, which is really nice. I think that the biggest issue I have with Animal Crossing is it's still very rigid with unlocking stuff and getting new items, and the animals just don't have enough to say. Otherwise it probably would be a little higher on this list, and I still have it. I think Tomodachi Life is more my style of Nintendo simulation, having been playing that recently. Alright, and the rest of 2020 is Sukuna Rice and Ruin, Wide Ocean Big Jacket, Final Fantasy VII Remake. I can't remember the name of this game, so I'm just going to put it on the screen. It's long. And Carto. Alright, 2021. Metroid Dread, being the best game in the last decade of a particular year, is just the bee's knees for me. Dread is what I've wanted the series to evolve into from the 2D side for a long time. I feel like with Super Metroid being my second favorite game of all time at the time of this recording, that nothing has quite gotten to that level again. And Fusion and Zero Mission and of course Other M and then Samus Returns, all of them are good to middling depending on your perspective. I think most people would think Other M is a disaster. I do. But there's something holding it back. So for Fusion, I think it's the difficulty. I think the bosses are way too hard and the save points too infrequent. And it's also the most linear outside of Dread secretly. Zero Mission relies too much on the Shine Spark, and I don't like how they changed grade. And Samus Returns kind of missed the mark on atmosphere, and it has some really bad enemy respawns that really sap exploration right out of it. Dread finally clicks just about every checkbox of my personal wish list for a Metroid in the two dimensions. And it plays incredibly well. Samus is super responsive in a way that she has never quite been. Incredibly fluid, has melee countering options. Her attacks feel really weighty and good. She's just a really fantastic feeling character in Dread. The environments are really interesting. The boss fights are phenomenal. There's some really great enemy encounters. The level design, while it is a little bit secretly handholdy, I think works because it doesn't directly feel that way. It's more subtle. I love Samus as a character in this game beyond the way she plays. I think this is like how I've always pictured Samus behaving, which is just delightful. And outside of the music, which is the weakest link in this entire thing, Dread is just one of my favorite Nintendo games of all time. It's really good. Transaruby is a delightful kind of Metroidvania by Skipmore, if I remember correctly. And it's just got a really charming pixel style. The chiptune soundtrack is really good. It's got some really unique ideas. Being able to transform into a bike, I think, is a really cool concept in terms of like a run. You also have some really interesting kind of shoot 'em up parts in the back half of the game. The story's kind of fascinating as well. Just a lot of the pieces come together really well for Transaruby. It's a little bit... You're left to your own devices at points, so you kind of get lost when you're trying to remember something that you need to go back to. That's really the biggest fault it has, but otherwise, I love this game so much. I got the super rare edition for the physical, so I could actually have a physical copy of it. Really, really amazing game. Guilty Gear Strive. I've dabbled with the Guilty Gear series for a long time, and I feel like Strive is where it finally came together for me in a lot of ways, especially when Elphelt came out. And Elphelt is one of my favorite fighting game characters of all time. I think that they just nailed everything about her redesign perfectly, and she's so much fun. But this game looks fantastic. The soundtrack is banging. It's got some really great characters on top of Elphelt that have really distinctive and unique stuff going on with them. Faust is a great example of a very unique character. And they just reinvented the entire gameplay loop recently, and I haven't had a chance to dive into it. I'm not that good at Strive, so I probably wouldn't notice a ton. But it's one of the best fighting games in the last few years. I just don't have it in my top 110 list at this point, but it's super close to being on it. Unpacking is another indie game that I just really thought was a great concept of going through a young woman's life from childhood to middle age and experiencing the moment to moment of what's important to her at this point in time, that she would move it to another location as she's going through a major stepping stone in her life, like going to college or getting into a relationship, not being in that relationship anymore, having a child. Lots of really cool stuff that is just so subtly told through the act of unpacking a box and you getting to put it where you think it belongs. It's a brilliant game, honestly. And while it's not the type of game that I imagine has a ton of replay value, it's still a game that I treasure having experienced. Mario Golf Super Rush is a game that is awkwardly on this top 5 because I don't think Camelot put their full effort into it. I think Toadstool Tour is still the better game, but I have played Super Rush a ton with my parents, and that is basically our family game at this stage, and it's a lot of fun playing it with them, and that's primarily why it's here. The Switch 2 also makes it look a little bit better and run a little bit better. But the biggest faults with Super Rush is that it's just not visually up to the same level as most other Mario games. It's got some quirky mechanics that I don't think it needs to have, like not being able to control the hooks or slices. It's random. The courses are more uninspired compared to past games. And a lot of them are just thrown together on a singular map, and just I don't like that approach. It just makes everything feel like it's less fantastical than a Mario Golf title should feel to me. I don't know why I feel that way, but it's true. Despite that, though, I enjoy it. It's not something I play on my own. After I got through the single player mode, I was pretty much done with it, but it is fun visiting with my parents and playing this for a while. The rest of 2021 is the Codden remake, which I think they called Codden Reboot, Arietta of Spirits, Resident Evil Village, Sable, and Monster Hunter Stories 2. Alright, this probably looks slightly different because this is a second recording session. But we can get into 2022 with Splatoon 3 being at the top. And I've talked a little bit about Splatoon 3 on this channel. I feel like in a lot of ways it's the best Splatoon game, and in a really, really compromising area, it's not as good as 2. I'll go ahead and hit the pros real quick. I think it's the best looking. I think it's the best feeling. I think that the soundtrack is the greatest overall, especially since it compiles the majority of 1 and 2 soundtrack into it, at least in the jukebox. The solo content is fantastic. Multiplayer is still fun, despite my one gripe, which we might as well get to because it relates to multiplayer. And my one gripe is I think the maps are less dynamic and interesting than in 2s. I feel like they really create a funneling effect that works way too well for the opposing team to just rush your base and camp there versus actually doing the gameplay suggestion of either covering the ground or ranked. And that's unfortunate because it really just kind of cramps up the stage really fast. So if you have a dominant team that is either on your side or against you, and they just decide, you know, the strategy for this win is going to be camping their opponent's base, then it basically reduces the game to that, and you don't get to do the fun ranked stuff or the covering the ground stuff. That's also quite enjoyable because you're too busy trying to just get out of your base to do that. And it just makes a really fun multiplayer experience less fun having that happen. And I've had it happen often enough that it really has made me sour a bit on the potential of Splatoon. I'm excited about Raiders coming up, and I want to see what 4 ultimately does on the multiplayer front. But I think 3 took a couple missteps. I also don't really care for side order. Speaking of roguelites earlier, I don't think that quite resonates with Splatoon the way that I would like it to, but I think other people got more out of it than me. I'm just annoyed because Off the Hook are my favorite characters in the game, and that's basically where they're at, and I can't even unlock the Splatoon 2 hub world because of the mode. Anyway, Splatoon 3 is great, but I feel like I'm waiting for Splatoon 4 at this point. Vampire Survivors. Now, this is a great example of a game coming out of nowhere to surprise me. I didn't get into Vampire Survivors at launch. I didn't get into it following a few DLC campaigns. It really was the Castlevania crossover that hooked me into it. And it's a great experience. Very distinct gameplay loop where you just have to survive and you just move. You move around. That's basically what you do. You don't control your attacks, they happen automatically. And as you level up, you gain the ability to expand your repertoire in various ways. You can either add more weapons, you can increase your stats, regain health, etc. You can also find treasure out in the map, so exploration is important. And ultimately, it's just a really fascinating gameplay loop that really hits a lot of good things in the brain. I really respect what they've done with Vampire Survivors because it's a game that is essentially a rogue-style game that I quite enjoy. Although I have to say, if it didn't have the Castlevania DLC, I don't know if I ever would have touched it. But thankfully, it turned out to be a good game. Fire Emblem Warriors 3 Hopes is, my opinion, the best Warriors spin-off with Nintendo. Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition is a very close second. But when you combine all the things they learned across Hyrule Warriors and Fire Emblem Warriors, add in characters that I absolutely adore from the Three Houses franchise, and create a very fascinating spin-off where you introduce a new character and put the original protagonist in a bit of an adversary role,
It works. At least it did for Idleguard's campaign. When you recruit Byleth. I've seen what happens if you don't, and I don't care for it that much. I haven't played Claude's. At some point I will. I will never touch Dimitri's. I've gone on record on my opinion about the Blue Lions. But I just think that Three Hopes does so much right in terms of evolution of the Warriors crossovers and a rather well done Gaiden story for the Three Hopes or Three Houses characters that I think it's very strong. I liked it a lot. King of Fighters 15. The last we'll see SNK ever on my lists again. This was after they were pretty much gobbled up by the Saudis, but it was around this year that happened, and it didn't really infect this game like it did with Fatal Fury City of the Wolves. And it's probably my second or third, probably third favorite SNK fighter overall, behind Mark of the Wolves and possibly Last Blade 2. I just think that King of Fighters 15 is a really great mix of old and new characters. They dropped the timeline so dead characters could come back. So seeing Shermie and her crew return, for example, is really cool. I think Isla is one of my favorite fighting game character designs of all time. She's just really sick and is just a really nice like foil to Kimberly, who showed up a year later in Street Fighter. And the game is rather nice looking. It's not like Guilty Gear Strive or Street Fighter 6 quality, but it's certainly the nicest game in the KOF franchise in 3D. And I just think it's a good time. I enjoy playing this game. I haven't played it in a while, but I do think that it is basically a really strong love letter to the entire KOF history. And I am thankful at the very least that it's a fitting swan song for me, because I will not be supporting them any further. And last but not least is a really tough toss-up for the next beat-em-up that I would probably put of best beat-em-up in recent memory. Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge and River City Girls 2. And I'm not going to touch on River City Girls 2 too much because its glitchiness and weirdly difficult secret hunting knocked it down. Shredder's Revenge takes the mantle that was established by Konami's beat-em-ups with the franchise and basically retreads that territory, but with a brand new art style that looks fantastic, gameplay that refines and adds to the original formula in very significant ways, brings in characters outside of the Turtles themselves to expand the roster, especially with DLC, really making some cool choices, and is a meaty beat 'em up, possibly too long. But I think in the grand scheme of things, it's just a really loving tribute to so much of the Ninja Turtles legacy, especially in animation and in video games and even the movies. And for me, it's not quite top 3, but I would say easily top 10 beat 'em ups of all time. And to round out the list, River City Girls 2, Xenoblade Chronicles 3, Kirby and the Forgotten Lands, Drainus, and Pocky and Rocky Reshrined, although I probably would bump Kirby down a couple notches, having played it more and realizing it's not a game for me. 2023, pretty important year. There's 6 games that show up on my top 110 list, and Tears of the Kingdom was on it. So pretty strong year. Resident Evil 4 Remake, however, is easily my top choice. I've played it like 12 times since it came out. I recorded the majority of a playthrough on this channel. I stopped at the second half Separate Ways because there just didn't seem to be a whole lot of interest in continuing Ada's campaign. Maybe I'll get around to it this summer just to wrap it up and say that we're all done. I wouldn't hate playing this again. I think that RE4 Remake is definitive. I think that it takes everything that was good in the original and takes it to 11 on all levels. Characters are better. Visually is certainly better. I think the music overall is on par or better. I think that the game's feel is infinitely better. I love the new mechanic of pairing with the knife. It adds so much to the moment-to-moment combat. It basically tosses in everything that mattered from RE4. It does feel different enough that I don't think it replaces the game, but it definitely stands strongly as the version Capcom wants people to think of when they think of RE4. I will say that there's a couple little things that I wish were different. Sadler's portrayal in this remake is definitely a step back from the original. There's a couple little elements here and there that didn't quite make the jump either in the main game or in Separate Ways. But I think that they handled this remake exquisitely well, and it is in my top 5 games of all time. So I think that says a lot about how I feel. Street Fighter 6. I am so happy that 6 turned out as well as it did. I had written off the series for 15 years, thereabouts. I didn't like the way Street Fighter 4 looked or played. Street Fighter 5 doubled down on it, and I never touched it. Street Fighter 6 finally returned to an art style that I appreciate and think is a great look for the series. It plays, I think, better than any other fighting game. It has a great soundtrack. It's got lots of content to explore. World Tour mode is fantastic for a solo fighting game enthusiast like me, who doesn't really play against people. They really went ham on the online features, which I don't have access to, having my lovely PS5 offline because I don't want to pay Sony money to play online. But the features are robust, and they keep adding new stuff. We're getting avatar battles outside of just the little center arena space in the hubs, so that's really nice. There's tons and tons and tons of characters now. They're about to get Ingrid into the game, and I'm looking forward to actually getting into World Tour with the 4 new characters, because I've decided to do them all at the same time over the summer. If there's any faults with Street Fighter 6, it's some of the DLC choices I'm not the hugest on. They kind of fucked over Alex's narrative for some reason. I don't know why. I could do without Ed coming back, personally. It is the last thing that has SNK characters in it that I bought, basically. So Terry and mine, Street Fighter 6 are excellent crossovers, and the closest I'll probably get to a Capcom vs. SNK 3. For now, we'll see if that actually happens, but my enthusiasm for that has certainly died. But I don't have a lot of complaints about Street Fighter 6, honestly. I think it's just a very superb fighting experience that is pretty high up on my list. It might be second behind Ultimate, Smash Ultimate, because you just can't really argue with the amount of content in that game. But Street Fighter 6 is a very solid second place, and in my top 20. A Dead Space remake also came out in 2023, and much like Resident Evil 4, I think it's the definitive way to play the original game. Everything Motive did to enhance the original Dead Space experience is perfect. They replaced the annoying turrets with a far more engaging, gravity-flipping experience of turning on satellites to attack the asteroids instead of you controlling a really poor minigame to do that. And that, it makes sense, and it's really tense, and it's a great replacement. Characters are much stronger. The level design's even tighter. It feels fantastic to play. The atmosphere is even stronger. Isaac talks, he communicates, he doesn't just stand there silent, doing nothing with a personality. He has one. That is probably my most important aspect that I feel Motive nailed, is Isaac has a personality. He's actually got some investment in what's going on here. All in all, wonderful. The biggest fault with Dead Space Remake is that apparently EA doesn't understand that survival horror, unless you're Resident Evil, doesn't hit millions upon millions of numbers. So Dead Space 2 Remake was canned, and I'm going to be eternally upset. However, speaking of companies that I can't support anymore because they're owned by the Saudi government, Electronic Arts. So, again, a really good endpoint for me to jump off of. Mario RPG Remake. I bounced off the Super Nintendo game at the Axel Rangers. They just overwhelmed me, I think, and I just got really frustrated. Thankfully, Arte Piazza's brilliant reimagining of this game leaves so much more or less the same, but adds enough new wrinkles to the combat, like having team-up attacks and just clear explanations on things, that I think that this is the definitive version of the game. The graphic style is perfect in terms of catching the original look, but also updating it in a loving and caring way. The soundtrack upgrade by Shimomura is mwah! So good. I think that the RPG combat feels better. I think that the platforming overworld segments feel better. It's top to bottom wonderful. One of the best games you could get on the original Switch. And a huge improvement in my opinion. I really enjoyed revisiting Mario RPG, and I think it's my favorite of all of the Mario RPG spin-offs at this point. All right, rounding out 2023 is Tchia, a delightful indie action-adventure game, although definitely leaning more towards the adventure side of things, set in New Caledonia, in a fictional island in that area. Representing that culture, this is a delightful game. It's a little bit rough around the edges, but I think it has so much charm and innovation and heart inside of it that I was able to overlook slightly janky controls, NPCs that just vanish until they're needed, because it just is a wonderful game playing as Tchia and gaining her abilities to control animals and being able to just jump into a bird and fly off somewhere. It's really great. She can just basically leap her soul into any object that's not human and or an enemy, and is a really fun gameplay hook. The sailing feels good as well. So the big thing about this game is that it's an adventure game first. It wants you to explore, it wants you to discover, it wants you to be mesmerized from the moment to moment discovery aspect, more so than any combat or anything like that. There is some fighting, but it's really about connecting with the culture, connecting with the people. I wish that you had more opportunities to connect with the people, but it's just a splendid game from start to finish. Despite a little bit of roughness, it's one of my favorite action-adventure games of all time because it just is so distinct and so unique. And I love it when a game is unabashedly about discovering more about a culture. I think that's a wonderful thing to make as a hook in your game, and Tachia does it really, really well. Rounding out 2023 is Super Mario Bros. Wonder, Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, Star Ocean The Second Story R, Shadow Gambit, and Baldur's Gate 3. Alright, last but not least is 2024. And if 2023 was a strong year for me, 2024 is one of the best of all time. 9 games on this list are on my top 110 list. Euphoria the Saga 2 is really close to being on it as well. It was in consideration. So I think 2024 is one of the greatest game years ever. Metaphor ReFantagio. This is Atlus's best game. Metaphor is just one of those games that I went in not expecting much and came away from it absolutely blown away at how a developer I had written off could still surprise and enthrall me. And I think that politically it's very good. It could be stronger. It could have a stronger commentary about how the government abuses people. It could have a stronger argument about how racism is a detriment to all society. But in the grand scheme of things, Metaphor does hit most of those notches. And I think the cast is fantastic. I love them all. I think that the art style is among the best Atlus has ever done. It's got such a strong visual aesthetic to it. The menus in particular are absolute masterworks of UI design. It is, without a doubt, one of my favorite role-playing experiences I've had in recent years. Right with Unicorn Overlord, the Vanillaware spiritual successor to a franchise that I've felt has been dead and buried for far too long, Ogre Battle. We did have Tactics Ogre Reborn not too long ago, but that's a different style of game. Unicorn Overlord is not a one-to-one homage to Ogre Battle. It does plenty of its own distinctive things, but it is close enough to the joy that Ogre Battle 64 brings me that I feel that it is worthy of being called the spiritual successor. And it's easily Vanillaware's best game. It is visually stunning, as all their games are. It is the least fan servicey of all of their games. It still has some. It's still cheesecakey in areas, but compared to like Dragon's Crown, it's way toned back. It is got some very solid characters, great designs across the board. The music is really, really strong, really, really good. But it's the gameplay that I think is its strongest attribute. It builds on what Quest developed for Ogre Battle and Ogre Battle 64, finds its own distinctive voice with how formations work, and how important unit placement in your formation is, in contrast to Ogre Battle, where it's important but not like the key mechanic. Where you put your people really determines so much about what they do. And I think that it's a really fun puzzle of finding the best way to put a team together for maximum efficiency on the battlefield. Its biggest fault, perhaps, is in the individual character writing. That's not to say that it's poor. It's just Fire Emblem GBA levels of depth. So you have supports, but they don't really get super detailed or emotional the way that you might expect. They're pretty static. The characters are well written, don't get me wrong, but it's not engaging on the level of like Three Houses, or even Metaphor, to refer back to that, in terms of building really tight connections. It doesn't quite work that way. Would I have loved it more if it did? Perhaps. But I think that on the whole, Unicorn Overlord's gameplay is its meat and potatoes, and the story is serviceable. So I'm gonna blow your mind the way like Metaphor might. But it's super duper amazing on every other level that I can look past it. And I enjoyed the story for what it is. But it's really carried on that distinctive Vanillaware flavor in its visuals and its music, more so than the storyline. But that's okay. I think that Unicorn Overlord is one of the best strategy tactical games I've played in a very long time. And I want to see more of that universe, but at the moment they are probably working on something else, because that's kind of how Vanillaware rolls. They don't tend to do sequels all that often. Neva, the second game from Nomada Studio. Greece is in my top 5 games of all time, so I was super hyped to hear more was coming from them, and it mostly delivered. Neva would never quite reach the emotional highs that Greece did, because Greece came out in a time where I needed that type of emotional connection with a video game to fully explore my personal grief. Neva is a very different game with more of a focus on its characters, and adds a lot of combat to the general moment-to-moment that is mostly solid. It feels good to play Neva and to get into encounters and fight stuff. It's not as 100% smooth as, say, just looking into what I was just talking about, like Muramasa the Demon Blade, for example. It has really meaty feeling combat in 2 dimensions. Neva doesn't quite get there. It's perfectly serviceable combat, but I do think that some of the situations that they set up for combat are not as tight as it could be. Like falling off of a platform kind of sucks in the middle of combat, and it's pretty easy to do that on accident. But there's enough there that I feel that the combat works. Visually, it takes its own distinctive course away from Greece's super watercolor surrealism to be more grounded in reality, and it feels like you're playing a Ghibli video game through Spanish lens. It's gorgeous. Musically, top-notch, as expected from Berlinist. It's basically everything I would want from a Nomada Studio follow-up on visuals, on music, and in level design, evolution. The platforming is still strong. The emotional beats are there, but done differently. It's more about the connection with Alva and Neva that builds up over time, and then you learn kind of the vicious cycle that they're in. It's a really great game. Their quality level did not diminish from Greece to Neva. Another code recollection. Arc System Works has a lot of Sing alum hanging out there, and they convinced Nintendo to redo the Another Code games in a brand new remake that I think is up there with some of the best adventure style games I've ever played. Ashley's story is told from the 2 games, so you get to play her as a little bit younger, trying to figure out where her father is. And then the Wii sequel that was never localized before, for US at least, where she's a teenager trying to figure out who she is and what she wants. And there's a lot of supernatural elements in the first game, a little bit less so in the second, but there's a nice mystery attached to it. It's a really great package that I think really capitalizes on the strong art direction. The music is really good. The refinement to how the original games use motion controls and touch controls, to basically reinventing all of that for the remake, I think works really well. The story beats are more or less the same. There's some differences, of course, but I thought that this was just spectacularly voice acted, spectacularly written, really compelling game that I enjoyed so much. I actually would like to track down the DS original and import the Wii sequel so I could see how those changed myself. But for now, Another Code Recollection was a very pleasant surprise and my favorite game from Nintendo in 2024. Last but not least, this was a bit of a tough call, but I do think that SteamWorld Heist 2 manages to top Silent Hill 2 Remake, because SteamWorld Heist 2 follows up on its predecessor by basically not messing with anything that the original game did and adding a much better way to traverse the overworld, putting that together with a great new soundtrack by Steam Powered Giraffe, strong characters that I feel one has a slight edge, but two has really strong characters as well. The story is certainly more interesting on the whole, and it pulls in some elements from past SteamWorld games. And it just feels much more complete between the sub mode and the battles. Is a really nice, delicate balance of going back and forth and not finding either too long in the tooth. I think that the SteamWorld Heist games are really fantastic strategy games, tactical games. They're kind of interchangeable for me. But I think that it's just a really well done follow-up. And I hope that under Atari, what used to be Image and Form can continue to do good stuff. Because this was the last game they released before Atari acquired them. And I'm just hopeful that they can find support to continue doing the amazing work that they've done. I will briefly touch on Silent Hill 2 Remake. If it wasn't for the mannequins being so hyper aggressive, it probably would be SteamWorld Heist 2. But because of that, there it is. And then Astrobot, Cat Quest 3, Little Kitty Big City, and Euphoria 2 The Saga round out 2024. And we are now rounding out the rest of Looking Back. I hope that you've enjoyed this revisit of this old idea of mine. It took a little while to get here, but here we are. Now you've got a better sense of how I feel about games through this series, and what I think are the strongest games per year going back to 1983. And like I said, we won't come back to this until the end of 2029. So in 2030... I'll see you again for another Looking Back episode. But until then, we will have plenty of other things to chat about. Appreciate you tuning in. Hope you have a wonderful set of days until the next episode. And take care, friends.